Elisha stepped onto the western bank of the Jordan and did not look back. The river lay behind him, calm again, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The mantle of Elijah rested across his arm, its coarse weight unfamiliar yet unmistakable. Those who watched from afar bowed their heads. They said nothing, but they understood. The Lord had not abandoned his people. The prophet had changed, but the voice of God remained. Elisha turned toward Jericho. The city greeted him with cautious hope. Its walls still stood, but something at its heart was broken. The water that flowed from its spring brought sickness instead of life, and the land failed to produce as it should. The elders spoke plainly. Elisha listened, then asked for a new bowl and salt. He went out to the source of the water and spoke the word of the Lord. From that day, the spring was healed, and the city lived again. As Elisha traveled on from Jericho toward Bethel, a group of youths came out from the town and mocked him, shouting, "Get out of here, Baldy." Their words were not childish play, but open contempt for the prophet and the work God had just begun through him. Elisha turned and spoke a word of judgment in the name of the Lord, and 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled them. The incident was not about personal offense, but about Israel's attitude toward God. From the streets of Bethel to the palaces of kings, the same question remained: would the word of the Lord be honored or despised? That question soon reached the highest level of power. Moab rebelled against Israel, and Jehoram set out to crush the revolt. He joined forces with Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom, trusting in numbers, strategy, and military strength. But as the 3 kings marched through the wilderness, their confidence drained away with their water supplies. The armies faced death without ever meeting the enemy. When the water failed and death loomed, the kings finally sent for Elisha, turning at last to the word of the Lord they had neglected at the beginning. His first words were sharp, rebuking the king of Israel for seeking God only in desperation. Then Elisha paused. Before speaking the word of the Lord, he asked for a musician. As the music played, the hand of the Lord came upon him, and only then did he speak. They were to dig trenches throughout the valley. Not because clouds were gathering, nor because the wind had begun to stir, but simply because the Lord had spoken. They would see neither wind nor rain, and still the valley would be filled with water. More than that, the Lord would give Moab into their hands. The instruction required obedience before understanding. Men put spades into hard, dry ground, carving channels where there was no visible reason to do so, trusting a promise that defied the natural order. The next morning, at the time of the morning sacrifice, the land was suddenly alive with water. It flowed quietly from the direction of Edom, spreading through the trenches and filling the valley. There had been no rain, no storm, no warning, yet the supply was abundant. The armies drank, the animals were sustained, and despair gave way to relief. From that day, it was clear to all that the spirit which had rested upon Elijah now rested upon Elisha. The Lord had confirmed him openly as his prophet, showing that the God who commands the heavens also provides life in the wilderness, and victory through obedience to his word. Yet the same water that meant salvation to Israel would soon become a sign of judgment to another. As the sun rose over the valley, its early light fell upon the water that filled the trenches. The reflection turned the pools deep red, and from a distance, it appeared as blood. When the Moabites saw it, they assumed the kings had turned on one another and that the camp lay defenseless. Confident of easy spoil, they advanced without caution. But when they came to the camp of Israel, the trap was revealed. Israel, Judah, and Edom rose up together. The armies advanced with strength restored, and the Moabites, caught unprepared, were driven back and struck down. The battle swept through the land of Moab. Cities were broken down, stones cast into every good field, wells stopped up, and trees cut down. What had once sustained the land was laid waste, and Moab was left devastated. The noise of armies fades, and Scripture leads us away from battlefields and broken cities into a quiet place of grief. A widow comes to Elisha. Her husband, one of the sons of the prophets, has died, and she stands on the edge of ruin. Creditors are coming, and her children are about to be taken from her as slaves. Elisha listens. Then he asks a simple question, spoken not in judgment, but in care. "What do you have in your house?" Her answer is short and almost apologetic. "Nothing at all, except a little jar of oil." "So get as many empty jars as you can find from your neighbors." Empty vessels are gathered, the door is shut, and as she pours, the oil continues to flow. Vessel after vessel is filled until none remain. Only then does the oil stop flowing, her debt is paid, her son is spared, and life begins again. The contrast is deliberate and unmistakable. The God who filled a valley with water to save armies now fills empty vessels with oil to save a widow and her son. He who governs nations also hears the quiet cry of a widow. Power and compassion flow from the same hand, and in both great need and small, the Lord provides more than is asked. From this point on, Elisha's work is marked by repeated acts of life-restoring mercy. In Shunem, a woman noticed the prophet passing by again and again. She prepared a room for him on the roof, simple and quiet. Elisha was so grateful that he promised her a son. The promise seemed impossible, yet in time, a child was born. Years later, the same child collapsed in the field and died in his mother's arms. She took him home, laid him on the prophet's bed and went in search of Elisha. When he arrived, he prayed with intensity and humility, and the boy's life returned. The child was restored, and the Shunammite woman fell at Elisha's feet in gratitude. Life had returned where death had taken hold, and the quiet upper room became a lasting testimony to the mercy of God. Once again, the prophet continued on his way, moving among the communities of the sons of the prophets, teaching, guiding, and strengthening them. But the land was still under the shadow of famine. Elisha returned to Gilgal, where the sons of the prophets were gathered before him. Food was scarce, and hunger pressed hard upon them. As they prepared a meal, one of the young men went out into the fields to gather herbs. Not knowing their danger, he picked wild gourds and cut them into the pot of stew. When the men began to eat, they cried out in alarm, "There is death in the pot." The cry of alarm echoed through the room. What had been prepared to sustain life had become a threat instead. Elisha responded calmly. He called for flour and cast it into the pot, then told them to pour out the stew. When they did, the danger was gone. There was no harm in it. Once again, death had been removed from an ordinary place by the word of the Lord. Yet the famine still pressed hard upon the land. Not long after, a man came from Baal-Shalisha, bringing food to the man of God. He carried 20 loaves of barley and fresh heads of grain in his sack, a small offering in a time of great need. Before them stood 100 men hungry and waiting. So Elisha said to his servants, "Give it to the people, that they may eat." His servant hesitated. What was so little among so many? But Elisha spoke again with confidence in the word of the Lord. They were to eat and there would be some left over. The food was set before the men, and as they ate, it did not run out. All were satisfied, and there was food remaining, just as the Lord had said. And that power of God demonstrated through the giving of food to the sons of the prophets did not belong only to the quiet communities of Israel. It was not confined to familiar faces or covenant borders. Beyond Israel, in the land of Syria, lived Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram. Powerful, honored, victorious, and yet carrying a hidden need no rank could cure. Naaman was a leper. A young servant girl from Israel, taken captive and serving Naaman's wife, spoke of the prophet in Samaria who could heal her master. And so through the quiet witness of a child, the story moves outward once more. Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. He expected ceremony, perhaps a public display of power. Instead, Elisha sent a messenger with a simple command. "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored and you will be cleansed." At first, Naaman was angry. The rivers of Damascus seemed better to him than the waters of Israel, and he turned away in pride. But his servants reasoned with him, urging obedience to a small command rather than rejection through pride. Naaman went down to the Jordan and washed as the man of God had said. When he came up the 7th time, his flesh was restored, like that of a young child, and he was clean. He returned to Elisha, humbled and grateful, confessing that there was no God in all the earth except in Israel. The healing of a foreign commander became a testimony that the Lord's mercy is given not by status or strength, but through humility and faith. After Naaman was cleansed, he urged Elisha to accept a gift. Elisha refused, making it clear that the grace of God cannot be bought or repaid. So Naaman departed in peace, changed not only in body but in heart. But Gehazi, Elisha's servant, watched it all and saw an opportunity to make a gain from Naaman's healing. He ran after Naaman and lied, saying that Elisha had changed his mind and now needed silver and garments for visitors. Naaman, generous and grateful, gave more than was asked. So Gehazi took the gifts, ran back home, hid them, and returned to Elisha as if nothing had happened. But Elisha knew what he had done, so he confronted Gehazi gently but firmly, asking where he had been. Gehazi lied again. Then Elisha spoke the judgment of the Lord. The leprosy that had been removed from Naaman would now cling to Gehazi and his descendants. In the years that followed, the community of the sons of the prophets grew. And they came to Elisha with a practical concern. The place where they lived and studied was no longer large enough for them all. They asked permission to go to the Jordan, where each man could cut beams and build a larger dwelling. Elisha agreed, and at their request, he went with them. As they worked by the river, one of the men swung his axe and the iron head flew from the handle and disappeared into the water. The man cried out in distress, because the axe was borrowed. What should have been a day of hopeful building suddenly became a moment of fear and loss. Elisha asked where it had fallen. When the place was shown to him, he cut a stick and threw it into the water. By the power of God, the iron rose to the surface. Elisha told the man to lift it out, and the borrowed tool was restored. The quiet work by the Jordan did not last long. While Elisha was teaching and guiding the sons of the prophets, trouble was stirring beyond Israel's borders. The king of Syria began to send armed bands into the land. Time after time his plans were frustrated, because Elisha warned the king of Israel where the enemy would be. What was spoken in secret was revealed by God. Angered by this, the Syrian king asked who among his servants was betraying him. They answered that no one was a traitor, but that Elisha the prophet told the king of Israel the very words spoken in the Syrian bedchamber. So the king of Syria sent horses, chariots, and a great host to seize one man. They came by night and surrounded the city where Elisha was staying. Early in the morning, Elisha's servant rose and went out, and when he saw the city encircled by soldiers and chariots, he was afraid. He hurried back and cried, "Oh no, my lord! What shall we do?" Elisha answered calmly, "Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Then Elisha prayed, and asked the Lord to open the servant's eyes. At once the young man saw the mountain full of horses and chariots of fire surrounding Elisha. God's protection had been there all along, unseen but real. As the Syrians came down toward him, Elisha prayed again, and the Lord struck them with blindness. And so Elisha led them into Samaria, right into the heart of Israel. When the Syrians' eyes were opened, they found themselves surrounded, not by enemies, but by those they had come to destroy. The king of Israel asked if he should strike them down. But Elisha said no. Instead, he commanded that they be fed and sent home in peace. And so a great meal was set before them, and they returned to Syria without harm. After this, the bands of Syria did not come into the land of Israel for a time. Peace did not last forever. After some time, Ben-Hadad king of Syria gathered all his army and came up against Samaria. The city was surrounded, and a long siege began. Food in Samaria grew so scarce that people even began to eat one another. Hope had drained away, and desperation and despair filled the streets. As the king of Israel walked upon the wall, a woman whose child had been taken came crying to him for help, and in her desperate words the full depth of the famine was laid bare, exposing not only hunger but the terrible cruelty it had driven the people to endure. The king tore his clothes in grief, but instead of humbling himself before God, he turned his anger toward Elisha, blaming the prophet for the calamity and threatening to execute him. That same day, Elisha was sitting in his house with the elders. Fully aware that the king was about to send a messenger with orders to seize him, and perhaps to take his life. At that same time, Elisha prophesied. Tomorrow about this time, a measure of fine flour or 2 measures of barley will sell for a shekel at the gate of Samaria, declaring by the word of the Lord that the famine would come to an end. But the officer of the king heard this and scoffed. Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen? Elisha, angry at the soldiers' lack of faith, replied, You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it. Meanwhile, outside the city gate sat 4 men with leprosy. Shut out from the city and from ordinary life, they saw only death ahead if they remained where they were. They reasoned among themselves that staying where they were meant certain death, and entering the city offered no hope. So they decided to go to the camp of the Syrians, trusting that even captivity was better than starvation. So, at twilight, they went to the Syrian camp. But when they arrived, there was no one there. The whole camp was deserted. The Lord had caused the Syrians to hear the sound of chariots, horses, and a great army, and in their fear they fled, leaving behind their tents, their food, silver, gold, and even their clothes. The lepers entered a tent and ate and drank. They carried silver and gold away and hid it. Then they entered another tent and did the same. But after a while, their conscience troubled them and they said to one another, What we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace. So they went to the gate of the city and told what they had found. Though the news was doubted at first, it was soon confirmed. And when they realized that the lepers were telling the truth, the people rushed out of the city, and the word of the Lord came to pass exactly as Elisha had spoken. And the officer who had doubted was trampled in rush as the starving people ran to the Syrian camp. He saw the deliverance with his eyes, but did not eat of it, just as Elisha had said. And so, food was plentiful again. The prices fell to what the prophet had declared. Years earlier, Elisha had warned the Shunammite woman that a famine was coming upon the land and urged her to go and live wherever she could until the years of hardship had passed. She trusted the word of the prophet, left her home in Samaria, and went to live among the Philistines for 7 years. Now that the famine had ended, the Shunammite woman returned to Samaria and went up to the king to seek the restoration of her home. She was no stranger to the power of God. Long before her son had lain lifeless in her arms, and it was the word of the Lord, spoken through Elisha, that had restored him to life. At that very moment, the king was speaking with Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, and Gehazi was recounting the great works the prophet had done, telling the story of the child who had been restored to life. The timing was unmistakable. The king asked Gehazi if this was the woman, and if this was her son, and Gehazi confirmed it was her. So the king appointed an officer to see that everything she had lost was restored to her, including the income from the land for the years she had been away. So the woman who had once laid her dead child upon the prophet's bed now stood publicly vindicated and restored. Like all men, Elisha grew old, and his body became weak, but his authority did not fade. Kings still came to seek his counsel, and even in death the power of God did not depart from him. Some time after his passing, as a burial party fled from a sudden raid, they hastily threw a dead man into Elisha's tomb. And miraculously, when the body touched the prophet's bones, the man revived, stood on his feet, and life returned to him by the power of the Lord. Elisha had walked among the people, carrying the presence of God into homes and fields, into famine and war, into joy and grief. Through him, Israel learned that the living God was near, attentive, and faithful. And though Elisha passed from sight, the Lord remained, still at work among his people. Elisha in the golden thread. God's power continues through faithful servants. Elisha received the mantle of Elijah, showing that God's work does not end with one generation. Human servants pass, but the purpose of God moves forward without interruption. God cares for the overlooked and the ordinary. Elisha's miracles often meet quiet, personal needs: a widow's oil, a borrowed axe head, a hungry household. God's compassion is not limited to kings and armies but extends to everyday faithfulness. Faith in God's word brings life and preservation. Those who trust the word of the Lord are preserved. The Shunammite woman believed Elisha and saw her son restored, escaped famine, and later had her land returned. Faith acts before deliverance is visible. Mercy triumphs over power and pride. Elisha feeds enemy soldiers instead of destroying them, heals a foreign commander, and humbles kings without violence. God's strength is shown through mercy, not domination. Death is not the end of God's purpose. Elisha died as a mortal man, yet even after his death, life is restored through God's power. His story ends pointing forward, not backwards, to resurrection hope and the faithfulness of God beyond the grave. If you found this video interesting and would like to explore more, we have several options for you. One is our free, multilingual, Bible-based Christianity course, a free 30-lesson video course covering all aspects of the Bible and daily life. Another is the Bible by Stories, a series of over 50 videos that takes you on a journey from creation to the early church. And if you have questions about Scripture, there is a multilingual chat system on the website where you can ask any question on scriptural issues. To access any of them, simply visit the website listed below. If we don't yet have videos or the course in your language, please email us at the address shown, telling us what you are interested in and your language, and we will do our best to create them for you. God bless you on your walk to His kingdom.